There was one Hitler that Stalin managed to get his hands on, and all of the torture that resulted in his brutal death. Heinz Hitler was a nephew of Hitler, who was considered the favourite of the Nazi Dictator, and he was a member of the Nazi Party. But during fighting on the Eastern Front, he would be captured during Operation Barbarossa by the Soviets. When told that he had possession of Hitler's nephew in captivity, it's likely that Stalin would not have believed it, and he knew he could use the nephew to get to the dictator of Nazi Germany. But the story of Heinz Hitler is very dark, and he was brutally slaughtered inside of a Moscow prison, when he should have been considered as a prisoner of war, and should have been given some form of care and treatment. But Stalin's torturers would do their work on him, and the accounts of his death remain rather sketchy. Join us today as we look at the execution of Hitler's nephew, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Heinrich Heinz Hitler was born on the 14th of March 1920, and he was the son of Alois Hitler Jr. and his second wife Hedwig Heidemann. His father was named after Hitler's own father Alois, and he was first married to an Irish woman named Brigitte Bowling. But Alois Jr. and Brigitte would have another son who was named William Patrick Hitler, and the couple settled in Britain, specifically in Liverpool. This child was a half-brother of Heinz Hitler, and he would have a very different life to Heinz, as he would later go on to live in America and would even serve in the US Navy, fighting against Hitler, his own uncle, and his forces during the Second World War. But Heinz Hitler would take a more predictable path, and it was said that Heinz was a favourite nephew of Hitler, and that he would grow up living under Hitler's regime. But Heinz was different to his half-brother, as rather than opposing Nazism, he embraced it, and he would then dedicate his life and ultimately give his life up to the Nazi cause. When he was at school, Heinz would gloat and boast about who his uncle was, and he was then sent to an elite Nazi boarding school, which was known as the National Political Institutes of Education, known as the Napola. This was located in Bannenstedt in Saxony-Anhalt, and these schools were for the cream of the crop in Nazi Germany society to go to. They would indoctrinate children into the Nazi politics, and what the Nazis wanted for them, and the students who went there were considered future leaders in the land, and many it was hoped would become political figures or military leaders when they were older. Heinz Hitler being the favoured nephew of Hitler led to him to being sent there, and no doubt Hitler pulled some strings to get him into the school. But these schools were compared with other institutions such as Eton, but they were focused solely on Nazism and the policies of the party. Inside of the school for boys, there was a military education offered, and only boys of Aryan descent, who were said to have been completely racially flawless, were allowed to attend. These institutions were very strict, and pupils who wore glasses and had poor eyesight were turned away, and Hitler had huge dreams for his nephew Heinz. Only the most pure Aryans could go there, and students had to be in perfect physical health. But whilst he attended, Heinz Hitler was involved in the Hitler Youth, and he would also participate in the Reich Labour Service, working on community projects and building projects whilst he was on holiday. This is what was expected of the young men, and whilst he was at school he developed a reputation of being a very arrogant man. Heinz thought that he could get away with whatever he wanted due to his famous uncle, and one of his classmates said of one occasion that Heinz took them out for a drive in a car. Heinz was behind the wheel of the vehicle, and he drove through Magdeburg crazily without a licence, and when he was stopped by the police he just showed the identification documents he had, and because of his surname and who his uncle was, he was actually saluted by the police, and was then allowed to carry on driving like a maniac. But Heinz Hitler wanted a career inside of the army and military, and he wanted to become an officer and rise throughout the ranks of the army to one day become a general. He would, because of this, train as a soldier, and he served as a signal sub-officer with the 23 Potsdamer Artillery Regiment in 1941, when he was around 20. But after he was trained, he was immediately sent to the Eastern Front after the launch of Operation Barbarossa, due to the losses that were sustained on the front. Hitler had ordered the invasion into the Soviet Union, and this shocked Stalin, as the two nations had initially signed a ceasefire agreement in the form of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Hitler knew that he could one day rampage into the East, as he wanted to create more living space for ethnic Germans inside of Soviet lands. But his main goal was to destroy communism and to take as much of the Soviet lands as he could. But the offensive that was launched was the largest in history, and over 10 million soldiers would be involved in campaigns on the Eastern Front. To begin with, the Germans had a lot of success in taking these lands, and Heinz Hitler was now on the Eastern Front, and he was a willing and positive soldier who was willing to join the fight. It's likely that he wasn't fearful, as he believed that the Nazis would reign supreme over the Communist Soviets, and he knew that his place was on the battlefield. He was fighting on behalf of his uncle, and it's probable that Hitler was proud of this, but it's also considered that he may not have liked his nephew fighting on the ferocious Eastern Front and risking his life. He expected civilians and everyday German people to give their life for the Nazi cause, but he was not too happy with his own family members dying for this, especially those who he loved greatly. But Heinz Hitler would fight on the Eastern Front for a number of months, and on the 10th of January 1942, he was sent on a mission to collect radio equipment from an army post. This was considered rather routine, but during this mission he was captured and was intercepted by Soviet Red Army soldiers, who then obtained his identification papers, and they realised who this young soldier was. For Stalin, capturing a member of the Hitler family was a huge coup, and the Nazi dictator heard that his nephew had been captured, and he then became worried for his safety. Hitler, because of this, offered Stalin a prisoner swap, which was rare, and he offered to give Stalin his own son, Yakov Dugashvili, who had been captured, back to him, in exchange for the safe return of Heinz Hitler. This would have been carried out by the Swedish Red Cross to guarantee safety, but Stalin would not accept this. He was furious that his own son had surrendered to his enemies, and he rejected this, which in a sense sealed the death of his own son. But Heinz Hitler, following the rejection, was then sent to the Butyaka military prison located in Moscow. This was known for being a brutal and barbaric prison that was terrible in its conditions, but it was also very overcrowded, filled with enemies of the Soviets. Heinz Hitler arrived in the prison as a prize prisoner, but it was here where he would be killed. Whilst in the prison, Heinz was beaten daily and brutally for information, and he would be tortured repeatedly for information about his uncle. He was a man who had intel, which was key for the Soviets, and he had intelligence that no one else had about the close family life of the Nazi dictator, but he refused to give over anything. The more he denied the Soviets anything, the more he was brutalised by the guards. He was tortured so badly that he died inside of the Soviet prison. Heinz Hitler would give over nothing to the Soviets, and it's with this that his body was pushed too far. He may have been beaten too badly, and his death may have been a mistake with the guards pushing him too far. Having high-value prisoners for centuries was key for armies, as they could barter with their enemies for prisoners, and to get their own men back. It's also possible that Heinz's death was a mistake, but it's also possible that he was executed, and that this may have been ordered by Stalin to send a clear message to Hitler and the Nazis about his ruthlessness. Executions did occur at this prison using gunshot and hanging, but this also could have been the fate of Heinz Hitler. The death of Heinz Hitler took place on the 21st of February 1942, around a month after he was captured. He would be awarded the Iron Cross First Class, and was then brought into the torture chambers of the prison in Moscow for his interrogation. But this would be the place where Heinz Hitler would die, and he would never make it out alive. It's believed that his remains are probably buried somewhere around the prison still today, and also that Hitler was distraught when he heard about the killing of his favourite nephew. The death of Heinz Hitler shows the brutality of Soviet prisons, and Stalin would believe that the death of Heinz would be a victory over the Nazis. But still today the circumstances around his death are not the best known, as the real accounts of this lie deep within Soviet archives. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.